you hear me?
Yeah.
Beautifully. Yes.
There we
yes.
go. I can hear you.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry about that. That took a while, didn't it?
Uh-huh.
So apologies for that. I thought it was another day. Got my wires crossed. So yeah. So I'll start with a little bit of introduction about myself. So you'll have a bit of an idea about me and my background and kind of how I've ended up where I am. So I spent 14 years as a continuous improvement engineer for a car manufacturing company, where my role was to study intricately and ironically production cells or processes to improve cost, quality and delivery. It was also if there was any problems on production cells, because what happens in manufacturing is they're always chasing shipments. So the team leader, supervisor or cell manager would spend most of their days making sure that the shipments went out of the door. So if a problem arose, they kind of didn't fix it. They would put a plaster over it, they would bodge it, and then they would get the shipment out. And then if another problem came along, they repeated the process until they were overburdened with issues and they couldn't meet shipping demands. So my role was then to also go in and study the process. So observe, find out where the root cause of the issue was. If we couldn't find the root cause because there was too many problems, there was too much wood for the trees, we'd strip out the whole cell and we'd basically rebuild it. We'd start from scratch. So I'd got a lot of tools that I'd used through abnormality management, using visualization to set up Show for Pets, and kind of it paved the way for me growing and developing to what we do today. So we got our first bulldog whilst I was at Toyota, which is the place of employment. And I never wanted a dog personally. I was scared of them as a child. And the old saying goes, if something's meant to be, it will work against you. So 7 years, my ex fiance spent encouraging me to get a dog. We got this dog, went to see Ollie, 8 weeks old, sorry, and I fell in love with him immediately. And I just thought, I've got this little soul, this life, and I want to look after him. I want to do the best by him. The breeder had been raw feeding for 28 years. She just bred bulldogs. Their lifespan was 17 to 20 years old. She didn't flea them or vaccinate them, and she fed them all a raw food diet. I didn't really take much notice at this point because I'd been brainwashed by the manufacturing and marketing campaigns for complete and balanced diet. So I didn't see that as really a healthy food for Ollie at that time. So he was sent away with a week's worth of raw, which we finished that week off and he absolutely devoured it. After that, we bought a packet of Origin, which was apparently the best brand of biscuit out. And he ate the first meal and then he didn't eat and he didn't eat and he didn't eat. And to cut a long story short, it was several months of trying different brands, buying chicken from the supermarket, cooking it, giving him the cooked chicken and the jelly, which he devoured. Any biscuits, literally, it would sling across the kitchen floor. He wasn't interested or entertained in that in any way, shape or form. And it became very difficult. And I was doing a lot of overtime at this point, and it kind of eased off. And I just thought, I need to get this sorted out. It shouldn't be this difficult to feed a dog. So I started reading and researching, asking questions, which is basically just coming across from what I did on a daily basis at work, but with Ollie, asking, what's the best thing for a dog? What should a dog be consuming? And it started leading me back to a raw food diet. So that's kind of where the journey started. And today we specialize in nutrition, anatomy and health. And what I basically do is I introduce people to the dog as a species. So when we look at dogs as a species, the scientific name, which was given about 6 years ago, is Canis lupus familiaris, and the grey wolf is Canis lupus. The reason dogs were reclassified was because they found that the mitochondrial DNA, which is basically how they absorb food in order to turn it into energy, growth and life longevity, is 99.8% identical to that of their ancestor, the grey wolf. In biological studies, wolves and dogs are used side by side. So although we have changed the appearance of dogs and domesticated them, internally we haven't changed anything. At this point, what I normally say to customers is we've got to go back to nature. Nature's the best scientific lab that we have. You'll find there's 8 million species, there's billions of animals on Earth. You'll not find any biscuits, any cooking, any boiling or blending facilities or any animals that do that. And there's no flea and worm or vaccination treatments, and there's no disease, there's no vet required in nature. When we look at these species, they're either meat eaters, plant eaters, or both. So the carnivores, omnivores, or herbivores. And it's the features that we use to identify which species and which category those animals would sit in. So when we look at dogs, and we've got this awareness that by all scientific standards and evolutionary history, they're a direct descendant of the grey wolf. We have changed the appearance of them, we've domesticated them, but that's about it. And we start looking at the features to identify which category. We start with a mouth. So every single carnivore on earth has a jaw that moves up and down vertically like a pair of scissors, and every single omnivore and herbivore grinds. Your dog's jaw, a dog's jaw, moves vertically up and down like a pair of scissors. That, for me, is the one single feature that very clearly identifies this animal as a species. But because we've got a lot of misinformation being pushed deliberately because there's no money in health, we have to go further. So we look at teeth. So we find when we look into the dog's mouth, they're all sharp, jagged teeth. Their fourth upper and first lower molars are what we call carnassial teeth. This is consistent for cutting through the meat, the bone, the hide, etc. in the scissor bite, shear bite movement. The omnivore and herbivore obviously grinds from side to side, but they also have flat molars relevant for grinding. So obviously those animals grind their plant matter down, and the carnivores basically cut through like a scissor bite, shear bite movement. We can also look at salivary glands, where your dog as a carnivore produces one single enzyme called lysozyme. And lysozyme basically does what it says, is it basically lyses onto bacteria to destroy it. So when we look at the omnivore and the herbivore's mouth, they don't produce this enzyme lysozyme. They produce an enzyme called, well, two enzymes, beg my pardon, amylase and cellulose. These two enzymes are what basically kickstart the initial breakdown of vegetables and grains before they even reach the gut. So for those species, for those animals, digestion starts in the mouth. So when we look at the dog's mouth, we can very clearly see and identify a carnivore. If we move beyond the mouth to the digestive system, we find that dogs have a relatively short foregut, and it's a short, smooth, unsaculated colon, so it's more like a hollow tube. And their digestive time generally is between 4 to 8 hours on average, and generally. When we look at the omnivore and herbivore, they have a longer or wider digestive system with a sacculated colon, and it's more like a coiled hosepipe. And their digestive time is generally between 12 to 14 hours. Something that science has proved is that vegetation will sit and ferment in the colon for 12 hours. And that's where the majority of the nutrients are basically gained through the body. So when we look at dogs as a species, and I'll tell you for a fact today, there's about 90% of people that are in the raw feeding sector that are getting into this movement, and they're getting misrepresentation, and they are going down the wrong road. And there's two major sources of information that's pushed to people to kind of push them into that field. And one is that dogs eat grass, and the second one is that as a whole, as a direct descendant of the grey wolf, they consume the stomach contents of any species that they come across in nature that they obviously consume. When we look at the features scientifically, everything puts the dog into the carnivorous category. And when we look at the information that's been presented, if you know, and you've done the research and reading yourself, you know that they're only getting snippets of information, right? So when we look at the dogs eating grass, for example, there was a study about, again, 6.5 years ago. There was a lot of information I came across around about the same time, but it was Manchester or Liverpool University that conducted a study it was a short study. Again, it was at 6 or 8 weeks, and they looked at about 1,200 dogs, and they were split into two categories, healthy and unhealthy. And they were looking at the reasons why dogs consume grass. And the basic theory or kind of thing that's pushed at the moment is that dogs eat grass if they want to be sick, if they're feeling unwell. Well, both groups of dogs were eating grass, the healthy dogs and the unhealthy dogs. So that kind of debunked this myth. So they consumed the research. They found that they only hunted a specific type of grass out. So it was a long blade of grass that was quite thick, and they only tended to take the first 2 to 3 inch off. Once they consumed it, they either brought it back up through vomiting, or it was then eliminated shortly afterwards in the feces. When it's eliminated in the feces, it's in the form it was eaten, so it doesn't get processed. The conclusion of the study was that dogs eat grass as a natural dewormer. My personal opinion is that they're on the right path, but I think they use it generally as a purgative. I don't think it's specifically for worms. I think they use it just to cleanse the digestive system, because when they looked at the first 2 to 3 inch off the grass, it was like sandpaper. It was really abrasive, and it got these tiny fibers on it. And you can go out and look at this for yourself. Those fibers scrape the intestinal walls. My bulldog's 11 years old. He's been raw fed for 10 years. I don't flea him when I vaccinate him, and most people tell me he looks 4. And he also consumes grass. They're hardwired to consume grass, and he's never had parasites. I've done 7 worm counts with Ollie over 10 years, and there's never been one parasite found. A worm count kit will test for every type of parasite possible. So my awareness of it, my theory is that they consume grass as a purgative. But clearly, when it's been eliminated in the feces in the form it was eaten, they're not gaining anything from it. When we look to the second argument or part of information that are presented to people, and this is when dogs consume the whole species, a whole animal, they consume the undigested plant matter within the stomach as well. What we find is that when we get the whole information, so when it's a large animal, like I don't know, a venison or a sheep or a deer or something along those lines, what we find is that they don't consume the stomach contents. They will empty the contents of the stomach. They will disregard the contents every single time. And then every now and again, occasionally, they will eat the tripe, which is the stomach lining. When it's a small animal, they consume everything, including teeth. And you'll also find teeth passed in feces undigested, because the body will eliminate waste. If it can't use it, it eliminates it. So obviously, we've got a very small stomach with 1 to 2% of undigested plant matter within that stomach. So the dogs aren't going to get anything from it. We've established that through science. We've established that with grass. Even when people give cruciferous vegetables like cauliflower, broccoli, kale, or spinach, you will see that those vegetations come out in the form of in feces in the form that they're eaten, because their digestive system simply isn't equipped to process plants to extract the mineral content, the nutritional value. So we've got all this information to hand. It builds a bigger picture. Unfortunately, people are getting snippets of information, and then they're basically running with it. When I discuss nutrition, I go one step further, because I try to help people understand what it is that we're actually feeding. So we've got a lot of noise. I've been at this 10 years and I've seen a lot of noise. We've got a lot of noise about vitamins, and we've got a lot of noise about omega-3 and 6s and proteins. A scientific fact is that the body is electrical. You put a heart monitor on and you get an electronic signal. The world we live in is electromagnetic. That's why we have lightning. So when we look at the body, whether it's a dog or a human or a cat or any other species, and we look at 3 elements, which for me have taken me further than I could ever possibly imagined. One is the basics of biology. The second is chemistry. And the third is what organic and inorganic truly means. So when we look at biology, all life starts from a single cell. And it doesn't matter what species it is, it starts from a single cell and it multiplies into trillions of cells to make up its physical structure. When we look at those trillions of cells and we see skin and bones and heart and liver and spleen and pancreas and kidneys, etc., we are seeing different cell groups. And the reason why the groups are in different cells are in different groups is because of the mineral content, right? So it's been proven again scientifically, and this is coming back, this is cutting out all the nonsense and coming right back to the basics. In the basics of biochemistry, the body is made up of trillions of cells, and the cells are made up of minerals. So when we look at the skin, for example, it's a group of cells, bones, group of cells. But what make up the bone cells are calcium, magnesium, and phosphorus. The brain is carbon and copper. The kidneys are a bunch of cells, minerals. The liver's a bunch of cells, minerals. The spleen's a bunch of cells, minerals, and so on and so forth. There's 102 minerals make up a physical structure, and that doesn't matter what species of animal it is. There's 102 minerals that make up that structure. And if you want to look at a strong physical healthy structure, then we're talking about minerals. There's no vitamins, there's no numbers, there's no omega-3s or 6s or proteins that assimilate with the cellular structure of the body to strengthen it, because it's made up of minerals. So when we look at these minerals that's in a life form, a living organism, they're organic, they're of life, they're electrical. And when we look at the minerals that's in the earth, they're inorganic, they're lifeless, the ground, the earth. And you can't take something that's dead and put it into something that's living and get life out of it. So there's about 1,500 different brands of biscuits, and they all use rendering. as a way to process any raw materials. That rendering process reaches temperatures of 450 to 550 degrees. So any minerals, any nutritional value that was available generally is depleted, it's lost. So they have to then put something back in to then promote and be able to market and sell that product as complete and balanced. So what we get is we get synthetics. So we look in the dictionary, what does synthetic mean? It means it's fake. Well, we haven't got a fake animal. We've got a living organism. We've got something that's electrical. So something that's synthetic isn't going to assimilate with something that's electrical to give it life. We find inorganic minerals. We've just established that anything that's inorganic is dead. It's lifeless. Again, you can't get life out of death. And we get additives and preservatives. And basically, additives and preservatives again are things like acids, because they prolong the lifespan, so it kind of doesn't break down. We're getting into chemistry now a little bit. So when we look at chemistry, it's a really simple scale. It goes from 0 to 14. 6.8 is where you find health and homeostasis within the body. Anywhere below 6.8, and we're getting into the acid side of life. And there's two categories. There's chronic inflammation and acute inflammation. Chronic inflammation is where you find all major disease: cancer, arthritis, diabetes, heart disease, liver disease, lung disease, Alzheimer's, dementia, hip dysplasia. Essentially, whatever they want, whatever name they want to give it for whichever particular part of the body it's in, it's chronic inflammation, which is simply results in what has entered the body. Acute inflammation is where you find the body's natural healing ability. So any cuts and lacerations heal, and they heal through acute inflammation. And any broken bones will also heal, providing we give the environment. So we'll also find under acute inflammation the phrase allergies, which is a very loosely used word today and totally misunderstood. And when people go down the road of allergies, they're on a road to nowhere. Essentially, they'll end up spending hundreds, sometimes thousands of pounds chasing something that doesn't exist. When we look at this phrase allergy, it basically houses a list of symptoms: itching, scratching, rashes, hot spots, fur loss, flaky skin, dermatitis, dirty ears, and regular ear infections, to name the most common. So if we strip this word away, which is kind of pulling us away from the root cause, which is acute inflammation, those list of symptoms now sit under acute inflammation. And then when we learn in biology that skin is classed as a filter, it's often referred to in medicine as the third kidney, because it's the largest eliminative organ filter on the body. And we look at these list of symptoms, what we are seeing is the body in an acidic state. So the immune system, the body is in protective mode, and it's kicking out toxins, i.e. acids, because there's only two sides to chemistry, through the largest filter. So a list of symptoms will be seen. So when the dog's scratching, acids are blowing through the skin. I don't know if you've ever burnt yourself, but shortly afterwards it becomes irritated and you want to scratch it. So that's the reason why the dogs will scratch excessively, because of toxins coming through. You've got rashes, hot spots, fur loss, flaky skin, dermatitis, all acids being pushed through the skin. Dead cells, dry flaky skin, dermatitis. It's just the body in its natural cycle, which is to regenerate itself, because the body heals itself, which is something else that we seem to have forgotten. So the body is basically regenerating, degenerating, regenerating, degenerating because of that acidic environment. So essentially what the body does is it sends us a fault signal, and it's a warning sign that we need to look at what's going in. And this is what's been missed. So again, we come back to chronic inflammation, which is the root of all disease and illness, and only a result of what's entered the body. We don't age overnight, we age over a period of time. And disease and illness doesn't happen overnight, it builds up over a period of time. And it is simply a result of what has entered the body. So when we look at nature, which again, I'm just gonna reiterate, sorry, I'm a little bit nervous. So I'm just gonna reiterate, there's no fleeing, worming or vaccinations. There's no cooking, boiling or blending, and there's no disease in nature. There's no vet required in nature. You go to a zoo and they feed a species appropriate raw food. There's only two industries pushing biscuits. One is the veterinary industry, and the second one are the manufacturers. And the problem is that most people are unaware that the manufacturers control and own the veterinary industry. So we've got a major conglomerate called Mars Creations, who owns Royal Canin, Purina, UK Neighbour, for example. They own other brands. They also own the Vets for Pets franchise. About, again, 6.5 years ago, they invested $9.1 billion and bought a company called Medivet, who are currently going around the world buying up all the independent veterinary practices. So what we are now left with is a pet healthcare system owned by a chocolate bar company. we have individuals that go to what they see as educational facilities, universities, and what they are getting is one-sided information coming from one source, which in my book is indoctrination. So the exact words of a vet I saw out speaking on a platform, again, about 5.5 years ago, they spend 7 years at university, they learn about disease, symptoms and medications, and they gain 4 hours of knowledge on nutrition, and the nutritional information comes from a company called Royal Canine. So we're coming all the way back to Mars Creations, the conglomerate. Again, I said it earlier, there's no money in health. The system's broken, and it's broken by design. We've got lots of issues within the approach to what nutrition actually is, how we get it, how we achieve it, what nutrition actually is, and then the approach to dealing with faults or symptoms that the body then triggers to say, look, we're not in a healthy state. When a mechanic learns about an engine, it has to learn which parts make up the engine, how it comes together to work. So if there's a fault, the issue can be dealt with at the root cause. This is no longer happening in the approach to medicine. When we look at the approach to medicine and healing disease and illness in general, there's 3 approaches. There's allopathic, which is chemical, synthetic, inorganic. We've had this for about 200 or 300 years, and we don't heal anything anymore. There's nature paths, which I see and consider as the true healers, because they understand the body like a mechanic understands an engine, and also the approach that's needed to reverse that disease and illness and bring about health and vitality. And there's herbalists. Coming back to the allopathic approach, the allopathic approach is based upon a gentleman called Mr. Hippocrates, who in and around 350 BC cured every disease known to man using fasting and plants. And then whether people choose to be religious or not, 350 years later, Jesus is documented as a healer, and he used fasting and plants. There's been 4 to 5 healers throughout history, and they've all used fasting and plants. And today we use chemicals, and we don't get any healing. Today we don't fast. We have 3 meals a day, 3 staple meals a day, which is sold to us as a healthy amount of times to eat. We've established that inflammation is the root of all disease and illness. And when we look at the whole digestive process, it's one that's inflammatory. The digestive process initially is stomach acid. Again, there's only 2 sides to chemistry. The body creates stomach acid to break the life form down, whether it's plants or whether it's an animal. And all it's seeking are minerals, because that's what its cellular structure is made up of. So when the body's going through this process, it's creating inflammation. The pancreas begins to work. It's secreting digestive enzymes. The thyroid starts to work, and again the cells will process. And then when we look at the elimination of feces in urine, and we test the pH of that, it's acidic. So that whole process from start to finish is one that's inflammatory. So when we look at fasting, we can see the importance of it when it comes to allowing the body to heal itself, because it does. A broken bone, for example, won't heal unless we fast it from any movement. So it's generally held in a fixed position for 6 to 8 weeks, because any movement that's created, even if you look at your arm and you assume that you know the elbow's broken and you move your fingers, there's activity all the way down to the elbow. That activity creates heat, and that heat is inflammation. The body can't heal while it's in an inflamed state. So we've got to look at this whole approach in not just the nutritional side of it, but everything that's going into the body, because we also breathe through the skin. We take toxins in through the skin. It's not just a filter, it's also a sponge. We've got atmospheric toxins now. You know, there's not sounding too much like a conspiracy theorist, but we've got chemtrails, right? They are leaving trails of chemicals in the sky. We've got toxic substances in water. I mean, you can smell the chlorine in water today, which is an inorganic metal, which again has no belonging in the body. It's got to be organic. It's got to be electrical. Anything that isn't electrical will not assimilate with the body. Probably to give you a better idea about that, if you look at these 102 minerals that make up the physical structure, one of the most important minerals as I see is iron. The blood is iron. Healthy blood, again, the body being electrical, has 10,000 electrons per atom, and iron acts like a magnet. It pulls all of the minerals to it, including oxygen, and it conveys and feeds it to every cell in the body. That's how we feed the cells of the body. So if somebody's anemic, if somebody's deficient in iron, what they prescribed from the pharmaceutical industry is iron oxalate. And iron oxalate is it's a rock. It's inorganic. It's dead. It doesn't assimilate with the body. So because it doesn't assimilate with the body eliminates it. And when we look at that elimination, we tend to see people struggle with constipation or they get bound up, and that's because it were never meant to be in the body. We're not supposed to be putting dead things into the body because it doesn't assimilate, and then the body's lymphatic system, the body's sewer system, finds it difficult to eliminate. So again, we're coming back to nutrition. We're coming back to the biscuits, the tin foods, fleeing treatments, worming treatments, vaccinations. They all get placed into the lymphatic system, which is the body's sewer system. So basically speaking, you've got trillions of cells, you've got blood, and you've got lymph. And blood is what feeds the cells, and the lymphatic system is what removes the waste. The lymphatic system is basically the immune system, and it's said to be at least 2 to 3 times the size of the blood network. It's made up of hundreds of lymph nodes, which act like cesspits to break this waste down, and this waste is then eliminated through the central colon. If the colon's blocked, the lymphatic system's blocked. Tumours, growths and lumps will always be in the lymphatic system. They're not in tissue. It's just that we can't see on a microscopic scale, so we just see a lump in tissue, but it's always in the lymphatic system. Microscopic cells, microscopic blood, microscopic lymph. And again, this is a very key part of information that's getting missed, because we look at blood all the time, and the lymphatic system is the most underlooked and underrated system. If the waste system is blocked, then you're going to have problems, because it will back up into the cell, it will back up into intracellular spaces. We look at fat cells, it's stored toxins. The body can't do anything with them, so it just stores them and puts it into a place, hopefully to deal with it at a later date. But again, we can't heal the body internally if it's constantly in a state of inflammation. Choose which animal it is. So again, even for humans, we're talking about 3 meals a day, 12 to 14 hours of digestive time in a 24-hour period. There's no bloody wonder nobody's healing. So again, we look at the canine, we look at the nutrition. Nutrition is everything. It's whatever goes into the body, and it's either going to do one of two things. It's either going to assimilate with the body on a cellular level to strengthen it. This then creates that health, that vitality, and that life longevity, like what we see in nature, or it's going to do the total opposite. But when it does the total opposite, it's not necessarily going to happen overnight. It will build up and it will accumulate, and the results will be whatever disease and an area of the body those toxins have accumulated. That's what the root cause is going to have been and will have been. As I said, my bulldog's 11. He's been raw fed for 10 years. I don't fully or or vaccinate him. Most people, when they see Ollie, tell me he looks 4. I lost another bulldog at 5 years old, and at around about 16 months old, Charlie was diagnosed with allergies. At this point, I didn't really understand what disease and illness was and what allergies were. So we went down and to the vets, and we trusted the vet, and we'd had antihistamines, which did absolutely nothing. We did the steroids, which my mum had been on steroids for a long time. I'd seen the damage the damage and effects that I'd had on her immune system, and I didn't want to go down that road with Charlie. So after probably about a year of toing and throwing, we ended up on a drug called Apoquel, which did the trick, and I didn't know anything about Apoquel at this time. And for 3 months, Charlie had no allergy symptoms. So his body wasn't pushing out toxicity. His body wasn't doing the job it's designed to do, which is cleanse and protect itself, because it were being suppressed. The vets ran out of the Apoquel because it was, as I was told, quite a new drug at the time. And we basically started trying to source the Apoquel ourselves. And although I didn't find the Apoquel, I found a bit more information about it and a bit of a background. And Apoquel was under a different brand name about 15 to 20 years ago, and it was used with people, if I remember right, that suffered from HIV. And they had to shelf the drug because it caused more damage to the body than what the virus did. So what they did is they shelved it for 10 years, and then after 10 years they basically rebrand it and they push it down another avenue, and it was pushed into the pet industry. And what's supposed to happen is that vets are supposed to mark down and write down any side effects, any symptoms that they see from a new drug, but it doesn't happen. And it kind of doesn't reach and get back to the manufacturers. It's a Janus kinase inhibitor, Apoquel. It shuts down the K cells. the immune system basically is compromised of B cells, T cells, and K cells, and they all communicate to protect the body, to protect itself, its cells. And when we shut off the K cells, we basically shut down the body's ability to do that. I've had to deal with a number of dogs over the last 2 to 3 years that have gone down the road of allergies with their vet. And they've gone from one biscuit brand to another, to a hypoallergenic, and then obviously use the steroids, use these Apoquel drugs, which treat symptoms, not deal with the underlying root cause. And what that does is it actually locks the inflammation within inside the body. The body's trying to eliminate toxicity, and those drugs they basically shut off the body's ability to do that. These toxins then get held within the lymphatic system, and the longer that this happens, the immune system does what it's designed to do. It becomes immune, and it begins to, after a period of time, start to push this toxicity out. But the amount of toxicity has been accumulating over that period of time. So I've got a number of dogs over the last 2 to 3 years that we've had to reverse this toxicity, because the vet, unbeknown to them, has taken a dog with a very minimal amount of issues, health issues, and misunderstood the early warning signals that the body's telling it's intoxicated. Closed off that signal, and then allowed that toxicity to build up to the point where the very limited toolkit that they have, they've got nothing else, and they don't know what to do. So the best thing that they can then offer the owner is to put the dog to sleep. So I've got three dogs that are on our Facebook group that came to us within the last 2 to 3 years, and I've applied Hippocrates' approach. I've applied an approach from a guy that I found 3 years ago, called Dr. Sebi, and we've implemented fasting and specific plants to cleanse and target specific areas of the body. And within several months, sometimes 7, sometimes over a year, but we've reversed that disease nullness by giving the body the ability to shut off inflammation, giving it the energy, because everything is energy, and sometimes we forget how much energy it takes for the body to process food and eliminate waste. And again, I like to give examples. So if you go out and you have a meal, and you have a couple of pints, most people tend to overindulge, and I've heard people call it a food coma before. So we overindulge, and there's no energy for anything else. You just want to go to sleep. You've just given your body internally a load of work to do. There's no energy for anything else. So that's a good example that I see as how important energy is, and the fact that how much energy could then be used and is used potentially when the body starts to go into a healing cycle and start to heal itself. We've had results with the approach that Mr. Hippocrates used. We're not getting any healing anymore. And all I've done over the last 10 years is done my own reading and research based upon skills that I'd been provided with in an engineering environment. But everything has to compute to me. It has to make sense. And if it doesn't make sense, then it's nonsense. And certainly if you're not getting results from the approach is wrong. I'm very passionate about what we do at Show for Pets and my approach, because when I see results don't lie. So when I look at this history, and we've got a guy, Hippocrates, that used fasting and plants, and his approach has been kind of totally forgotten about, although people are still under the Hippocratic oath to do no harm. We're not using his approach. We're not using the actual foundations in which the health approach, medical approach were based upon. And I see this is where the problem is. There's no money in health, and I also see it's population control. But we've got to have this awareness. We've got to have a better understanding about what we need to be fueling. We don't feed the stomach. The stomach is a digestive system. It's part of the digestive system. It's a holding sac. It's a receiver. We feed in the cells of the body, and only when we feed the cells of the body with the minerals in which the foundations of that those cell groups are made up from, can we begin to see health and vitality return. Another story, about 1.5 years ago, I had a dog, an owner that came in with a dog, and the dog had basically only been raw feeding about three months. It had an accident, and again, this is where again the vets come into the door. The dog had surgery, they'd pinned the leg, they'd saved the leg, but the bone wasn't healing. And he asked me what we could look at, and obviously calcium is required for bone structure. So it was £4,500 in with a dog. He didn't want to have the dog's leg off because the vet had said if it doesn't begin to heal, we're going to have to amputate. He came into the shop. He asked what we could do, and I'd got some £3.99 antler powder. And the antler powder is basically the dust from antlers that are cut, and you can buy antler chews, for example. It's the leftover. And he took two bottles away, and 2 weeks later he came back and he says the bone's healing. Again, it's another example of the importance of minerals and the cellular structure of the body, and just what we should be feeding. And this is all I do with the dogs. We've got a sea vegetable called Irish sea moss. It's 92 minerals, or said to have 92 minerals out of the 102 the body's made up of. A number of dogs that I've assisted with their body healing itself, because it's the body that heals. We just give it the tools. We've put this Irish sea moss into the diet, and we've seen amazing results, not just in bringing the revitalization back to skin and coat and fur, but in also pushing the mucus out of the body. And again, everything's just stacking up, building up, and it's about sharing the information, which is why I'm very nervously doing this talk, and I'm hoping people find it interesting. I'm hoping things click and make sense. But it's about taking another approach. We've got a system I see as broken, massively broken by design, and we've got to start coming back to basics again, and starting from scratch. And that's what I see as my role, my job in this world today. So that's pretty much everything that I kind of go through with people. I've probably missed a lot off. And that might get brought up in questions because I can't remember everything, but sometimes things get triggered. So yeah, that's pretty much everything that I'd kind of go through as initially with the introduction, other than when we're getting into actual the minces and how the food is presented. So we've got a lot of minced products today. They do 80-10-10, which a lot of companies and manufacturers are again misrepresenting. And they put a label underneath saying complete. It isn't complete. It means it's balanced. It's a balance of meat to bone to offal. The complete side of the diet is and always will be the minerals, the 102 minerals, because this is what the structure is made up of. And it's not complete and balanced every meal like the synthetic biscuit manufacturers have allowed us to believe. Again, in nature, it's balanced and complete over time. The body doesn't regenerate itself all at once. It does it in snippets. So, it goes through a cycle, and I can't remember whether it's a 3 or 7 year cycle where the body's gone through full regeneration, but it doesn't have to be complete and balanced every meal. So when we look at the complete and balanced diet in terms of a species appropriate raw food, a soft diet, it's not every meal that's complete and balanced. It's balanced over time. So when we look at the minces, I always say to people, try and feed a minimum of 5 to 7 different animal types, because we don't know which part of the animal is being used in that mincing process. So we don't know which minerals are there, but the more we can provide, the better. But essentially, when people do, or if they do get into raw feeding, or I don't like to call it raw because it's a very open word, raw. It is a species appropriate raw food diet. Specific for a carnivore, or specific for an omnivore, or specific for a herbivore. But when we get into this diet, a whole prey diet is by far the best way that you could ever feed your dog, because that's 102 minerals right there in the life form of a rabbit or a pheasant or a quail, for example. And it's a balanced meal as well, because the 80-10-10 balance again was something it came from nature. So yeah, the nutritional requirements, it's not a set meal at a set time and a set amount. That doesn't happen in nature. Something we've been programmed and brainwashed with again: breakfast, dinner, tea, breakfast, dinner, tea, breakfast, dinner, tea. We pass this down to kids pass it down to theirs. It becomes the norm, it becomes the precedent. But it's not by the laws of nature, and it certainly doesn't do us any good in the long run, because the body's constantly working. It's not about the amount of food. It's never been about the amount of food. It's not about what some numbers on some scales tell us what the dog weighs. We look at the visual body condition. We can see if the dog is overweight or underweight. So if, for example, when we use the raw feeding calculator and it tells us that the dog should be consuming 1,020 grams a day, like my boy, for example, Ollie, yet he only needs 680, that's all Ollie needs. the calculator is a tool. It's a guideline. It's not set in stone. It's somewhere to start. So a lot of people get stuck on these types of things because they see it as gospel, and yep, my dog should be eating this, or my dog's eating 1,020 grams a day, but he will eat beef and he will eat lamb, and he will eat beef and heart, but he won't eat chicken or turkey, so he's going off those. A lot of the time what's actually happening is the dog's getting more than what it needs on a daily basis, so it starts to become selective, and then it starts to pick and choose what it wants to eat. And a lot of the time we can correct that by just reducing the portion down. At that, then the dog starts to realize that it needs to consume that amount per day to meet what it actually needs per day. But yeah, nutritionally, the minces are a more convenient way that the soft diet's been introduced. But essentially, the best way is and would always be to feed a whole prey, stick a whole prey down. And even if it takes 2 or 3 days, if it's 3 days worth of food, over those 3 days, your dog has had a complete and a balanced meal. Again, I know lots of raw feeders, very well experienced, that will basically fast their dogs religiously twice a week to allow the system to have a rest. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. We're just going back to the laws of nature. So, yeah, I kind of leave it at that because I can talk forever sometimes. I don't know how long we've been going, but we've got to be going about half an hour, 40 minutes. And obviously, if anybody's got any questions, then hopefully I'll be able to answer them. But I hope you found it interesting. I hope that you can take something away from it. And again, I don't dictate to people. You know, I'm very passionate, and sometimes people take it the wrong way. But it's just going back to basics and starting again, essentially, and then picking it back up from there. That's all I'm doing. That's all I'm doing within the shop, and it's kind of planting seeds and getting people to think outside the box. The vets are put inside these boxes, you know, and a lot of vets can't see that biscuit isn't food. They've been totally and utterly brainwashed, and they can't see the facts that's in front of them. There's only 2 industries pushing biscuits. One is the veterinary industry. Second one is the manufacturers. Why are there no biscuits in nature? Why is there no biscuits in a zoo? If a zookeeper is feeding a species a species appropriate raw food diet, why aren't we doing this with pets? Why is it seen as something that is going to damage and harm the animal when nature's been doing it since the start of creation, and it's still doing it today? So yeah, I'll leave it at that, and hopefully you found it interesting. And if you've got any questions, fire away.
What's the name of your business, Gary? Is it Gareth?
Yeah, Sure for Pets. SURE 4, number 4.
SURE, Sure for Pets. Okay.
Yes.
You do anything with cats then, or you just
same principle? Yeah. So your cat's a carnivore. The only difference between dog and cats is that cats are designed to kill and eat immediately, whereas dogs are designed to scavenge. So what you'll find when you get into raw feeding is people say that cats need high levels of taurine. Now, what is taurine? It's like protein and these other things that we get thrown around, or the electrical. So they'll say you'll find taurine in things like heart. The way that I see it, knowing that the body's electrical and knowing that healthy blood has 10,000 electrons per atom, when a cat kills and eats immediately, there's more electrons per atom in the blood. And that's what they need, right? Dogs don't need as many, so they can scavenge and they can come across rotting carcasses and consume that. But essentially, the only thing that's different with a cat is that they would kill their prey and then consume it immediately. So ideally, you want to be getting things like, you know, you can get chicken and heart. If you're feeding anything that is like an 80-10-10 to your cat, that's like a mince, add some heart or some spleen or something that would have more iron in its content. Or a whole prey. You know, we do chicks, we do quails, but essentially there was a study called the Pottinger study, and I forget the chap's first name. That's something else I've come across, and this is again an interesting piece of information about raw feeding. And Pottinger had somewhere along the lines of around 12 or 1600 cats, his own personal domesticated cats, and he did a study, and he basically fed half of them cooked foods and the other half raw. And the half of the cats that were fed the cooked foods, the majority of them, once they started getting into later life, began to have disease and illness, and the ones that were fed raw didn't. You can still find the Pottinger study online as well, which is an interesting thing to find. But your cat's a carnivore.
I mean, he is on raw. He is on raw. He just had quail this morning for his breakfast.
Perfect.
I had a dog for 14 and a half years, Collie, and he was raw, but he had an epileptic fit when he was younger. He was on dry food. Vet said EpiPen. Yeah. I went to a homeopathic vet. He was on raw. He never had a fit again. Just another question. With a cat, then I don't really want to flea or worm him. Can I do the same principle then? What do I have to do? What do I need to do then?
So when I'll talk about worms specifically and initially. When you look at a dog, for example, it'll be the same principle for a cat, right? Because we're coming to chemistry. The dog or the cat's stomach acid should be between pH level 1 to 2. It should be stronger than hydrochloric acid. Like when it is, through feeding a species appropriate raw food diet, there's two benefits from that. One is that we get efficiency in bone digestion because the bone gets a repeated bath in acid, but we've also just provided a barrier naturally, because the body's in homeostasis, naturally against worms. And it's the same with dogs. So when you find dogs and cats that are fed biscuits and cooked foods, they tend to have lots of issues with worms. Ollie's never had any worms because his body's in homeostasis. His stomach acidity is where it needs to be, not just to break the bone content down, but to protect him against parasites and pathogens that he might come across and pick up. So Ollie's had 7 worm counts in 10 years. I've not done like religiously a worm count every 6 months or every year. I thought, I'll do a count and just see where things are. I started off initially doing it religiously every year, but then kind of when everything were clear, you kind of forget, and then you think, I'll leave it. So it's worked out 7 over 10 years. He's never had worms. And the majority of people that are coming into the shop now with their dogs, which are changing over, because unfortunately, this moment in time, predominantly it is dogs, and I'm trying to branch out to other species as well. But they don't tend to have issues with worms. So sorry.
With fleas as well, because I don't want to flea.
So with fleas, even the chemically invasive treatments are preventatives. They don't stop it. So again, they work because they're acidic. Cleaning products, herbicides and pesticides, they're acids. There's only 2 sides to chemistry. So these chemically invasive treatments work because they're acidic, but they also damage the cat or the dog's body as well. But they don't outright stop it. But you can look at things like rose water. There's a herbal product that we use called bilinomates, which you can use about a month before the flea season starts, and then a month afterwards. And I've had some good feedback from that. So there's always a natural.
Are you based locally? Where are you based?
Barnsley.
So, So I could come in then. Do you sell food then?
Yeah. So we provide
just dogs? Just mainly dogs?
Cats are the same. Yeah.
I'll look you up then. And I presume you've got an online presence and everything. Yeah.
Yes. Yeah. We've got a website. Again, the website's really informative. I like to be as informative as I possibly can, and I've probably forgotten things that's on the website.
I'll look you up and maybe if you do for cats, because it's the first time I've had a cat on raw, and my other cats, they've all been pedigrees. But I'm also on this website, Crap Cats Raw and Proud or something. So but he's healthy. Yeah, he's a 5-month-old ragdoll. But I don't want to give him worming treatment.
Still very young. I mean, I'm not so sure about cats, but I know with dogs, at 17 months old, around that age, are classed as fully developed. At 7 months old, the dog's immune system is classed as fully developed. So what can happen is from about 4 months onwards, you can start to see symptoms of allergies and the body going through a cleanse, and it's misdiagnosed. And this is when people end up on the medicinal merry-go-round. They end up going round and round treating symptoms because they don't understand what the body's telling them. But your cat's still very young at that age and still developing, so the health's going to be there anyway. But I don't advocate flea, worm, or vaccinations in any way, shape, or form. My approach is going back to nature. 150 years ago, and again, I'm not so sure about cats because I've not gone into it as deeply as I have with dogs, but I'm pretty sure it's the same. But 150 years ago, life expectancy for dogs was 17 to 20 years old. There were no flea and worm or vaccinations because there were hardly any vets. They were fed butcher scraps and tidbits,
Yeah,
17 to 20. And cats will have been, you know, up there, you know, long lifespans. Today, with dogs, it's around 10. And I dare say that cats' lifespans have reduced as well because it's the same approach. There's vets in every high street corner. We're feeding biscuits, they're promoting flea and worm and vaccinations. And apparently this creates health and vitality, but it isn't. You know, so you've got to look at the evidence and the fact, observation and application. This is what I say to people. A bird cannot learn how to fly sat behind a desk. It learns through observation and application. And that's where we need to be again.
I mean, I go to homeopathic vet, but there aren't many of those about. I've got to go to the side of Leeds to a homeopathic vet.
Yeah, that'd be Brendan.
Brendan, been with him for about 15 years, So
again, just on the homeopathic approach, something that I learned from Sebi, and again, it makes sense, it computes. We've got lots of herbs and lots of plants that we use and see as a healing product or something that helps the body in healing. Things like comfrey, echinacea, milk thistle, for example. But the problem is with those herbs, they were made in a lab. So when we look back at nature, we've got a crossover and we've got lots of confusion because we've been attacked on every level that you could ever possibly imagine. And I think it started an issue with hybridizing plants. Milk thistle is a hybrid of blessed thistle. Both are used to cleanse and revitalize the liver. But blessed thistle is the original, right? And it's the one that comes from nature. So I would always choose herbs. My approach is very specific in how I look at dealing with an issue and then what I'm going to use. So when we look at the world that we live in, again, we're coming back to basics, the CHO arrangement, carbon, hydrogen, and oxygen. And everything that comes from nature is complete in that molecular structure. And anything that goes into the body should be complete in that molecular structure because that's when you get full assimilation. So when we look at carrots, parsnips, cauliflower, broccoli, spinach, potatoes, these are all vegetables that are seen as relatively healthy. They're all made in a lab. They all grow in a farmer's field and the roots go no further than a foot. Anything in nature, it grows anywhere and everywhere. It plants its own seed. Dandelion, nettle, burdock, elderberry. Nettle is the most nutritious plant on earth, but most people are unaware of that. Their roots go 2, 3, 4 foot into the ground because that's where the minerals are. And this is the reason why we are not, even as human beings, we're not seeing the strength and the health because we're not feeding the body on a cellular level with the minerals in which it needs to regenerate itself. We age because the body reproduces itself. If we're not putting the minerals in to assist that reproduction, it's like taking a photocopy of a photocopy of a photocopy. It becomes weaker and weaker and weaker. And again, it doesn't matter which species of animal you want to look at. This is what's happening. We're not feeding the cells anymore. So I'm very particular with the plant approach.
Sounds interesting. But let's just do more research on cats then, and I'll.
Yeah, definitely. But the approach to nutrition and health is exactly the same.
Same, yeah.
Because it's cells and minerals.
You said the Irish sea moss. I just looked that up. Humans can take that as well, can't they?
Absolutely, 100%. That is
a particular brand then.
So the only thing I would say on sea moss is that make sure you find a genuine one because there's lots of copies out. I found sea moss, Irish sea moss, particularly Chondrus crispus, 3 years ago. And I know over the last 3 years that there's a lot of companies and it's grown massively. A lot of people are well aware of it, but there's also a lot of alternative sea mosses and people are getting the wrong sea moss, so just be careful with that. But generally I use the sea moss as a healing tool because I do stand by my guns when I say to people dogs are carnivorous. They are carnivores, they are meat eaters, cats are the same, but we use plants to assist the body in cleansing and revitalizing. So when I use herbs, I decoct them, so I make them into a liquid, a tea. Because when we look at nature, we can visibly see that the animal has a digestive system specifically to process plants or meat, but they all drink water, and water contains minerals. So water is processed by the body in the exact same manner. So I always make it into a tea so that it can assimilate with the body, so the body can actually utilize it. Unless it's something like Cascara sagrada maybe, or clivers, cleavers, which Cascara sagrada is what's used to cleanse the colon, or you can use rhubarb root, and cleavers, which is sticky bud, is used to cleanse the lymphatic system. It helps to break tumours and lumps down and gets the lymphatic system flowing. And again, you can use those in plant or powdered form, rather than liquid. But anything that you want to actually assimilate into the body, it's got to be liquid, because they're not designed to process and break down that particular life form to extract the mineral content. This is why when you go onto forums, forums are great for awareness, really good, but there's so much false information, so many half truths in forums, and you get people saying, dogs and cats, or dogs are omnivores and cats are they're obligate carnivores, and you get all this information. You get people saying, we feed dogs carrots and parsnips, etc., but we blend them and we boil them. The whole point of this for me is going back to nature. It's about going back to a species appropriate raw food diet to get that health back. So no animals in nature do that. They either have a digestive system designed to process their species appropriate raw food, or they don't. So if we're boiling and blending, then we're trying to change the dog into something that isn't. Again, it's all these, once we observe and we look at the science and we apply it and we start looking at and observing ourselves, we start to see that it doesn't make any sense. Yes, there might be nutritional value in a food, but if you've got a gorilla that lives in jungle and a polar bear that lives in Alaska, right, there's benefit and minerals in meat and there's benefit and minerals in plants, but those animals can't access them. So you can't change their foods, and you certainly can't change the geographical locations, because that's where nature placed those animals, and they'll thrive in that environment. So yeah, we've got to look at what we're actually feeding them. My approach with people is, because there's a lot of information that I give out, and some of it can be scientific, and I'm trying to kind of condense 10 years of the reading and research and remember that information, then get it out there. So once I kind of get people to understand the dog or the cat as a species and look at nature, ask yourself 2 questions. What you are going to give that animal, would it find it in nature, and would it consume it? And if the answer is no, then that animal shouldn't be consuming it. It's really simple. We break it back down to simplicity. We've got to come back to the very basics, and then we'll start building again. But I think there's that much noise. People are getting so lost with information, and we're not getting the healing. And we've gone down this road of vitamins or the electrical. Where do they assimilate with the body? I've heard people tell me vitamin B12 is what conveys calcium. That's what iron does. Iron acts like a magnet. Iron conveys everything to the cells of the body. Omega-3 and 6s, are they electrical? Do they actually assimilate with the cells of the body? Because it's minerals. And I've just come back to this basic principle and understanding, and that's all I'm applying at the moment. And again, we get some results. So I love it. I love it.
You could apply that to humans as well, I suppose. It's the same sort of thing, isn't it?
Absolutely.
You need to do another talk, apply it to humans then.
This is the beauty of it. It just rolls on, because when we look at the basics of biology, all life, it's cells and minerals. We live in a mineral kingdom, and we seem to have forgotten it, and we're depleting the earth of minerals, and then we're losing life, certain plants and life forms, and then there's nothing for the living, the animal to then feed off, so we lose that life form. And this, we're being attacked on literally every level, and it's mind blowing. It's mind blowing.
Yeah, interesting. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Could I just ask about the fasting, Gareth?
Yeah.
Do you, I know I've seen over the years, a lot of pets seem to be fed morning and night.
Yes.
And I remember when my parents had dogs very early on, they just used to get 1 meal a day, and that was it. And I presume that's a much better way of doing it.
100%. But again, even not having a routine, lots of people choose to feed twice a day, but 1 meal a day most definitely, because the body's resting for a longer period of time. But again, it's ironic because of the level of brainwashing. I get people coming in, and the dog's the dog comes in, it's absolutely thriving, it's got a perfect body condition, it's not overweight or underweight, but because the owner hasn't got consistency in meal times, one day it will eat, the next day it won't, the next day it'll eat half a meal, they think there's something wrong. And all the dog's done is settle back into its natural instincts, and it's eating when it needs to eat. not for the sake of it. So, you know, in any instance, 1 meal a day, let the dog kind of just do what it wants to do. Fine, as long as you've got an ideal body condition, the ideal body shape. You've got the 3 P's, as I call it: peeing, playing, and pooing, and a waggy tail.
Right.
The individual ends up concerning themselves and panicking and creating issues within themselves because they don't understand. There's no understanding, and again, this is why they say knowledge is power, because fear comes from the lack of knowledge. Fear comes from not having the information. So, is that right? Isn't that right? Should I be doing this? Shouldn't be doing this? This doesn't feel right. It doesn't seem right. And I think sometimes a lot of people end up going down. They cause themselves a lot of problems with it. So, 1 meal a day, absolutely 100%. Even for us, 1 meal a day would be more than adequate.
Oh, there's masses of research on human fasting, isn't there? But could I also ask, I know Pauline's been taking the Irish sea moss. Do you do you sell it?
I have some of the Irish sea moss, that I get from St. Lucia.
Right.
I mean, it's not a bad product at all. It's worked and it still works. I try to, because I was consuming so much at one point, I was putting it in gravies, soups, teas, and I try to have it as a capsule now because it's easier, and I have it mixed with bladderwrack. So, you know, you don't have to just. There's various ways that you can obviously get, but you can feed the body on a cellular level, because this is what it is.
Well, I was quite fascinated because when I saw it, it really is very gloopy, isn't it? And I was thinking that is going to offer not only minerals to the body, but, you know, holding water as well, because of presumably the mucilaginousness of it. So
again, it's known for that as well. For basically, if you're dehydrated, it rehydrates the body. It's got loads of benefits, Irish sea moss. When you get you know, the Chondrus crispus, and again, you know, you get this information. So I found this Sevier 3 years ago, and he was talking about Irish sea moss. Nothing compares to Irish sea moss in a mineral content. And I applied it personally with me. I had a huge mental breakdown about 2.5 years ago. Lost my mum, lost my dog, lost my relationship. That fell kind of foundation that broke away. And I'd got my head down that many rabbit holes. I was researching and reading that much. I think my head just crashed, and I couldn't even remember how to use a tape measure. This is what happens when you have a massive mental breakdown. I was hospitalized for 3 weeks, and then you start beating yourself down because you're on the mental ward, and all they wanted to do was give me drugs. And I were kind of very early stages of getting into Sebi and learning about sea moss, and I just saw all these people I ended up in Doncaster first, which were really good. They tried to assist you and help you and understand what had happened, etc. And then I got transferred to Rotherham, and all they wanted to do was drug you. And I was seeing these, you know, very severely ill mental patients, and I thought, I need to get out of here because I'm not going to heal here, and I need to get in. I feel weak. I need to strengthen myself. And I came out and I started with the Irish sea moss, and I was having literally about 2 or 3 tablespoons into a cup of burdock, nettle, yellow dock tea. I was having about 7-8 cups a day. I was fasting, and I was having fruit juice smoothies. And 3 months later, I was a totally different man. I felt stronger, and that for me was the evidence. I then obviously had a dog that I was trying to heal or assist in healing in Wales. Casper, the Bichon Friche, and the owner Vicky, who I've never met, and we were about 7 or 8 months in, and we just weren't getting anywhere. And I said, look, I've applied this Irish sea moss. I don't really know if it can be used. I've not found anything to say that it can't, but it's minerals, and all the bodies is minerals. We'll make it into a liquid. So we made it more into a soup as opposed to a gel, and she started adding it to Casper's food, and in 2 or 3 months, the illness, the disease had gone. And I just thought, again, it's another example, and I was still questioning it. And then we had another dog came along called Sasha, 2-year-old German Shepherd. Basically, the best way to describe it is the living dead. The whole skin, it was dead, but there was life within this poor dog, Sasha. And we introduced a cellular cleanse with specific plants, and we introduced the sea moss. And with a matter of, again, about a month and a half, 2 months of introducing the sea moss, the amount of fur that had grown back, her skin were looking healthier. And again, I just thought I started to then realize that, you know, there's truth in what this guy's saying. I've seen it, and I've applied it personally. I'm applying it with dogs, and again, this has really kickstarted my approach. But ironically, when everything were kind of going wrong in my life, I remember looking up at Sky on holiday and you know, asking God, Creator, well, what am I doing wrong? Why am I getting it so wrong? You know, tell me what I'm doing wrong. Show me what I need to be doing. What's my purpose? And that were about 6.5 years ago, and my life got turned upside down, and I've ended up here, and I do believe I've been guided, without a shadow of a doubt, without sounding too religious. But again, I take things as they are.
What does it taste like? Does it taste awful, or has it got any taste?
It doesn't taste of anything. It's very bland. If you add bladderwrack, for example, which is good for removing heavy metals and also good for skin conditions, eczema and things like that, that is very salty. And that's why I have the sea moss and bladderwrack tablets capsules, because I can't drink the bladderwrack. It's definitely one that you've got to have the taste buds for it, and it's not for me. So I have it in the capsules now.
What, the bladderwrack?
Bladderwrack, yeah. And then on top of that, I mean, I've just again, I used to spend money on clothes, and you know, you spend £400 or £500 on clothes and you feel good for a little while, and then, well, they're old now, aren't they? You've had them for 24 hours. But it's different now, because when I invest in the herbs and they make me feel good inside, it's a different way of feeling good about yourself, and you feel good within. And again, it all just adds up, it just mounts up, and I love it. So yeah, I invest in myself now, in my cells, rather than in what I look like in my appearance.
Are you in your shop? Are you in the shop quite regular, or to see people?
6 days a week. Too much, really. 7 years coming up. I've had about 3 months holiday, so it's yeah, I've invested a lot and it's taken a lot out. I'm generally there 6 days a week. I've had a week's holiday this year so far. So
right. Yeah, because I've got a little Maltese. She's 9-year-old, but she's doing a lot of biting of her feet. She has raw at morning, you know, the nature's menu, and then evening she tried her on different biscuits, so she has a bit of both.
Yeah, but I don't advocate that for many reasons. One is it's synthetic, it's inorganic, it's not something the body recognises or processes, which is why if you see a dog that's consuming biscuits, the body processes it, so it digests it, and throughout that whole process, what it's seeking is minerals. It's looking for the nutritional value to feed it itself, its cells. And when there's nothing there within the biscuit or the tinned food, what it does is it eliminates it, because it's all waste. So you get a load of waste being produced, and generally it stinks, it smells, and that's the additives and preservatives. And one of the things that I've noticed is the body processes it, and there's nothing there for the body. It doesn't recognize it, doesn't just get rid of it. So the body eliminates it, and then it ends up on the ground on earth. And if people don't pick up the dog's poo, it's there for weeks, because the earth doesn't even want it, right? But when you feed a species appropriate raw food diet and you get the elimination of waste, there's very little waste, because the body's utilized the calcium, the magnesium, the phosphorus, the potassium, the zinc, the iron, the mineral content that was contained within that life form has been basically recycled into your dog's body. So the waste is then eliminated, right? And very shortly after the dog's passed the feces, you'll see that it starts to degrade. It starts to break down into the earth, because the earth can take what's left. So the earth will accept that, but the earth doesn't want the chemical, synthetic, inorganic rubbish that your dog's body couldn't utilize. So it sits on top of the ground for weeks, sometimes months.
I'll have to come and see her, because she's feeling a bit sticky underneath.
So under her arms?
Yeah.
Yeah, so we've got major lymph nodes under there, so we're getting into lymph stagnation. So the body's kicking it out. Yeah, so I will be definitely, getting rid of the biscuits. I'd change the Nature's Menu because it's not one of the best brands, in all fairness. They do meat, bone and veg, or meat, offal and veg. And again, we're getting people that are being misdirected, misguided. Even if they were omnivores, they wouldn't be consuming carrots and parsnips and spinach because they don't grow in nature. They're found in a farmer's field because they were made in a lab.
So if I've got some nettles out of garden and some cleavers and chop that up and put that in some mincemeat or something.
You can, but obviously if you decoct that, if you basically put it into a pan, and I always use spring water. I don't recommend using tap water. Again, people wash the drugs, medications down the sink. They can't filter everything out. You've got again the chlorine, that you can smell the chlorine in the water, and the chlorine basically can interfere with calcium absorption within the body. So spring water into a pan. I normally, if it's a dried herb, I'll do a tablespoon of the dried herb into like half a litre. If you're doing any more than 2 other herbs, if you're doing a compound, as I would call it, if you're doing 5 or 6 herbs, I'd put a litre of spring water into a pan. And if you can give those compounds at the same time, boil them for 15 to 20 minutes, let them cool, strain them, and then obviously you can use the liquid. And you can find dosages online. I've got a chart at work, but I can't remember off the top of my head because there's different weights and then different tablespoons or teaspoons.
So give them chop it up after you've boiled it and put it in with some beef or something. You see, you get that many people tell you different things. She's a Maltese. She's only £8. They can't have beef. They can't have liver. They can't have it, and you get that confused what they can have and what they can't.
So again, as a species, we've got so much nonsense that's been pushed around. This is why I'm not so fond of forums anymore, because people are getting misguided. I've been at this 10 years and I'm still learning now. But I have a different approach because of my background. Things have to compute, they have to make sense. And if they don't all come together to complete a jigsaw puzzle, then that piece gets left to one side. So we've got all this information about what dogs and cats are and what they should and shouldn't be eating, etc. And then we've got this other information that's getting put out there. And even on my journey, I found that 75% of the information, it's nonsense. It doesn't make any sense. So I leave it out. And I just apply everything that does make sense. So again, you've got to use what resonates with you essentially, but you've also got to see it work. If it doesn't work, then it shouldn't be. We shouldn't be doing it. And again, that's.
Sorry.
Could I just break in? I'm really sorry about this. I've got another appointment at 11:30, and I know Gareth's got deliveries to do.
Yeah.
So I'm going to have to wind it up. But Gareth, that's been amazing. I'm a complete cellular health nerd like you are, so I've really loved that.
Awesome. We're not nerds. We're just awake. We do know what's happening. We're aware of ourselves.
It sounds like you're really accessible to us from West Yorkshire, only in Barnsley. So that's cool. Brilliant. I'm sure there'll be people in touch.
If anybody does have any questions or anything, then they can get up. They can come into the shop. That's perfectly fine. That's amazing. That I will help anybody, and I'll try to help everybody if I can.
Where in Barnsley are you? Whereabouts is it?
Do you know Barnsley? Are you in and around Barnsley?
No, Pontefract way.
Pontefract. So I'm out that way tomorrow. But do you know Barnsley Town Centre where the market is and everything?
Yeah.
Or the swimming baths. The swimming baths. Yeah. So basically, it's in Barnsley Town. It's just outside Barnsley Town Centre, just outside the Alhambra. And the postcode generally gets you there. And I'll help anybody. The world needs more love. It's missing.
What is your postcode?
It's Sierra 70 for Hotel Tango.
Can't think. I've got brain.
4HT.
S70 4HT. 70.
Yeah.
4HT.
HT. Right. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Fantastic.
Thank you.
Thank you very much, Gareth.
Yeah, yes, absolutely. Fantastic.
Thank you. I'm really pleased you've enjoyed it. Really pleased.
Yeah,
thanks for listening.
Thank you. Good for the scientific approach.
Brilliant.
Sorry?
Good for the scientific approach.
Definitely, that's what science is. We question everything.
Absolutely, yeah.
Yeah, science
And
is never
industrial,
settled.
I see that your industrial background helps a lot too, which is great.
Lovely. Thank you ever so much.
Hey,
Thank you, Gareth.
All right.
Cheerio.
Have a good day,
Thank
everybody.
you.
Great day.
You take care of yourselves.
Thank
Bye.
you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye, and
Bye.
thanks for coming around.
Thank you for
Thank
listening
you.
again.
Thanks,
Bye-bye.
No,
Gareth.
you're
Cheers.
great,
Bye.
actually, I have to say.